Welcome back to HUMN, where today we're going to be looking at ways to prevent injury. Now, functional fitness is one of those things. It's demanding a lot of your body, and it does come hand in hand with a few injuries here and there. And we want to try and look at how we can reduce this as much as possible. And we're going to dive into 5 top tips for helping you avoid that injury trap. So first up, and this is a little phrase I like to think about, it's not the poison, it's the dose. With anything, the more you do, the more you have a risk of getting this injury. Now let's think about something like running. If you just went out there and you hammered the miles, you were pounding the pavement for as long as you can, you're probably going to find yourself with something like shin splints or some sort of knee aggravation or pain. Now, if you had this long run that you've just done there, but you broke that up into smaller sections of rest and recovery as you went through, you may not get that same sort of stress on your body. So first thing to think about when you are going into your training is the dose you are going into. If you're new to training, try and get your body used to going a couple of times a week, maybe 3 times a week. Once you feel like you can adapt and you can take that into your week without too much problems, then slowly up the dosage of that exercise. So moving on to point number 2, this is about our time in the gym and it's about our intention while we're there. So if you did have those 3-4 days of training with inside a gym and you hammered the weights, you smashed the cardio and you took an absolute head-on approach to your training, every day you are leaving, you're on your back after your workouts, that is commendable, amazing work, but it's a recipe for disaster down the line. You need to try and think about finding ways to allow your body to adapt from your training. This could look like having high days and low days, some days where there's a big effort, some days it's more moving the body and trying to sort of soothe those aches and pains as you go through it, but we can't always be at 100% effort. You may see a phrase thrown around like RPE. So that is your rate of perceived exertion, okay? This is your level of effort that you're putting into a workout. And this is super important. Some workouts may ask for 10 out of 10, but you can't be 10 out of 10 all the time. Finding that sweet spot or understanding where you need to be within those levels, within those weights, within those cardio efforts, you could be finding something that's more sustainable in a long period. So training at that sort of lower end of a rate of perceived exertion could be like a 2 or a 3, a conversational pace. You might have heard things like zone 2, stuff where you are training in a nice relaxed state. If you are shifting up that sort of scale of RPE from 0 up to 10, 10 would be all out maximum effort. You are on your back afterwards, your tongue's hanging out, you are going crazy through that workout. Finding that way to find the difference between those 2 levels could be the answer to making sure you are training more often. Okay, so that might mean that you are not injured as much, you're not as tired as much, but you are still getting a good amount of dose response from that workout. So somewhere in that 7 or 8 out of 10 is a really good way to try and look at your workouts. Obviously, there may be some times you need to max out and you need to push those weights, but the majority of our training should be with control, with good form, and that sort of stays in that realm of that 7 or 8 out of 10 effort. Bringing us on to point number 3, this is all about resting. So we've trained hard. Now we need to try and think about resting hard. And as cliche as this is, you have to rest to progress as you go through. You need to make sure you have that downtime as well as the time where you are pushing your body. Now, this goes to say rest could be one of many things, okay? It could be restorative massage. It could be a day off on the sofa. It could be dialing in your sleep. It could also be just hanging out, doing something outside of the gym that's non-strenuous, going for a walk, going for a swim, or just spending time with your friends, your family, your kids, and moving your body around. It doesn't necessarily need to be strenuous. Some people do say active recovery days and things like that, but I think it's all about trying to find those really nice low days where you are not stressing your body, okay? So we all know you have to stress to progress, but you also need to add that resting element in there as well. It's super important, and I would definitely make sure that you are finding some of those days within your week where you are doing not very much and you're not in the gym doing those things. It helps the body recover and it helps that mind recover too. So point number 3, find ways to rest, recover, and restore your energy before hitting the gym. So point number 4, we're going to try and look at areas that we may have a little bit of an idea that we may struggle with. So I personally do have a little bit of a a few issues with my shoulders, and I know that I need to work on these to maintain health and longevity of those joints. Some people do struggle with their knees, with their ankles, but even if you have a little idea of these things that could be prone to injury over time, I think doing some work before the injury can really help. So having some activation work in there, some light soft tissue work afterwards, after you've trained those elements, and giving them enough time to rest and restore, a bit like the point before that, is super important, okay? If you do get to a point where you have overstressed those joints and you are looking at doing rehab, so you're rehabilitating those joints afterwards, it's really important to get that structure within your training, something that you can consistently do. I am now a slave to the bands, so I'm doing lots of activation in my rotator cuff that I have to do before sessions that involve my shoulders. I think I would need to do that anyway. If I could talk to myself back in time, I would have done a few of those things, and it probably would have saved me a little bit of money and also a little bit of time that I am spending now working those shoulders. So finding areas that you feel like you may suffer in is a really great way to sort of preempt those potential injuries. Don't skip those activation movements. This brings me on to point number 5, and I think it's a really, really strong point to look at. It is finding a coach or another set of eyes or mind that can help you with your training journey. Now, if I was to be in control of my own training, and I would first of all find it a little confusing, I would probably be a little biased towards my training. I might end up avoiding things I don't want to do. Whereas with a coach and accountability, they can zoom out a little bit, look at what you're doing, pre-plan where you need to go, where you are, and how you can make that journey in between those two things a little more concise, and then also adapt to make sure that volume or that training is not aggravating or overdoing any certain area. You can obviously get those coaches to look at your form, your movements, and you can have a good coach would have that open conversation that allows you to make sure you are continuing to maintain or increase your ability throughout movements rather than just sort of hitting different random spots as you go through it. So grabbing a coach, going to a gym that runs classes with a sort of set structure can be a super beneficial way of reducing that chance of injury over time. So this leads me on to my last couple of points. Okay, I know we've gone through 5, but these last 2 here are things that I just think we need to practice and maintain for a long time. And it is doing the basics well. And this goes inside the gym, outside the gym, and all in between. So doing the basics of movements right, checking in on your movements, your mechanics, and how you execute what moves you do in the gym. Okay, sometimes that could be filming yourself to see your form. It could be asking someone else to check in on some things that you're working on. But make sure you are squatting well, you're hinging well, you're pressing well, and you are checking in on this balance of strength throughout your whole body. But doing the basics well of movement inside the gym, doing the basics well outside the gym, making sure your sleep hygiene is good. So you are making sure you get good rest each night as you go to bed, making sure your diet is also looked after, making sure that your management of stress in your life is also under check. All these things can add up to a big boost in energy inside of the gym, outside of the gym, and it can make you a very rounded, very positive person in your training, and it will also help you train for longer over time. And that's the aim, right? It's not worth training so hard and then taking an injury and a big hit. It's worth trying to keep that steady curve moving for as long as you can. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to be fit, healthy, and useful for as long as we possibly can. So do the basics well. Now, this brings me on to my last point, and I think it's a bit of a burner, right? Injuries will happen, and I think you need to have that going into any sort of sport, any sort of physical movement that you're going to do. If you are playing football, netball, hockey, cricket, even swimming, there are going to be some elements of overuse injuries, freak accidents that are going to happen. Now, that's not to scare you off. These injuries are a very small ticket price to pay, potentially, for the benefits that you can get from exercising as a whole. Exercising as a whole, we are reducing those chronic illnesses that can come up. So type 2 diabetes, obesity, certain types of cancer, all these things can be reduced. You can put your bets on that is going to reduce those sort of things over time. Picking up the odd shoulder injury, maybe a little tweak in the knee here and there is something that is going to happen. So be prepared for those things. Have a bit of a plan. Don't be too hard on yourself. And when you do have something that does set you back, what can that help you do to move forward? Could a little bit of time away from that fast-paced, competitive style of fitness, what could you get from that if you did, say, you did have time where you had to sit down, you had to recalibrate, you had time to work on some of your other weaknesses, you had time to work on your gymnastics, your nutrition, your diet, your relationships outside of the gym. You can try and find those little bright spots after something like this happens. So the last point is, injuries might happen. Prepare for those things to happen and have a bit of a plan to try and find a bit of a positive spin that comes out the other side of it. We'd love to know what you think about injuries within the sport of CrossFit, training CrossFit, high rocks, ATHEX, any of these racing, functional fitness training platforms, even just training yourself to be a useful human. We'd love to know what you think about that. Hit us in the comments, like, subscribe. We want to open up this conversation and we want to try and show you how to find ways of training better for longer. That's Team Human. We're out. Catch you next time.